Hey everybody, I'm going to explain a few things to you in terms of how the program works and why it works better than pretty much anything else that's out there. So in order to do that, I just want to take a wee bit of a step back and show you what the journey into alcohol dependence looks like and what the journey out of alcohol dependence looks like, and then you'll start to get a real sense around why the program works the way it does and why it's so different. But if we just think about how an addictive substance actually acts in the body, you'll see that if, for example, let's just call this your kind of baseline in terms of your wellness is there, what might happen is you might, for whatever reason, you might have a little bit of a dip and you think, okay, well maybe alcohol will make me feel better. So you have a drink, and whether you're feeling anxious or something like that, remember alcohol is a depressant, it will push you back up again. Now interestingly enough, that works for the first drink, but generally it doesn't tend to end there. But just if you bear with me in terms of the cycle that we're talking about. But the key thing that not many people understand is that alcohol then creates a craving. Any addictive substance acts in exactly the same way, whether it's nicotine, whether it's alcohol, whether it's heroin, all to a greater or lesser extent. But the satisfaction that it's just created then leads to a further craving. Now, that craving can only be satisfied by the substance that's created it. So if you use the example of, let's say, for example, a heroin addict who is desperate for a fix because they've not had any heroin for a while, if you were to offer them a beer or a coffee or something like that, it's clearly not going to make any difference to them at all, because the only thing that is going to change how they feel is actual heroin itself. So what happens is you get into this horrible sort of up-down cycle where you've got this craving and then satisfaction, craving and satisfaction. But the really cruel thing about this is that it's not a linear process. So over time, your body develops a tolerance to the alcohol, and so what happens is, instead of it being a straight line, you actually find it's a bit of a descent. So there's the craving, the satisfaction, the craving, the satisfaction, the craving, the satisfaction, and this line only goes down the way, and it's very, very subtle. Obviously with something like heroin, we can all imagine the addict who goes from a huge high to a huge crashing low. Alcohol is much more subtle and much more insidious, which is why it is such a big problem in society as a whole, as we actually don't realize this kind of creeping up on us. So once you kind of understand how an alcoholic how alcohol acts on the body and how an addictive substance works, then you start to understand what the trend is. So what we'll do is we'll take a bit of a step back now and just kind of understand how that can manifest itself over time for you. Okay, so armed with this information about how alcohol works and how we have this cycle of satisfaction and craving, you can see that over time what happens is, apologies for my squeaky pen, but you get the idea that we're on this kind of downward spiral. Now remember, life is full of ups and downs and things like that, so there will be times that things will happen that will speed this process up, and we will take a step down towards being completely out of control with regards to what we're doing. But there will also be things, you might get a new job or a new partner or something like that, and you've got to be on your best behavior. So what we tend to find is that this is not a straight line at all, but overall, because of the nature of alcohol, it does take us to a pretty dark place over time if you're drinking regularly. Now, what happens is, if you get below this line, and it's different for everybody, but if you get below this, what I call the out of control line, that is when you kind of feel like you have no option other than to drink. And if you're watching this video, I would imagine you're probably feeling a bit out of control, that it's not necessarily a kind of a conscious decision that you make anymore, and that can be a really scary place to be. Now, so what do you do about this? How do you get out of this situation? Well, clearly you need to make a change, and you need to arrest this decline, and you need to get back above this out of control line, and that's where obviously where control is. Now that can be, there are various different ways that you can do that, and there are many different really good organizations that will get you the support to get back above that line again. I think what's really different about the Freedom Program and the approach is that many of the existing programs that are out there actually keep you somewhere around about here. And again, this is a bumpy line, life gets in the way, and it's to try and avoid you dipping back down below that line. So if you can stay above this line, you're going to be all right. But it's not a terribly aspirational place to be. Now, overall, what I'm promoting is that you get to this point here where you go, okay, enough's enough. I need to make a change. And actually, the options are surprisingly few and far between. But if you get back on a more upwards trajectory, remember, life has its ups and downs. So there will be times that you will probably dip back below that line, whether it's peer pressure, whether it's your circumstances change, grief, loss, all these kind of things that happen to us in life can sometimes push us back into a very dark place. But overall, if you can keep this upward trajectory, then no matter what happens, you don't get back down to that thing. Now, if, for example, let's say, I'm going to assume that you are not a recreational heroin user, I'm willing to believe that there is probably no circumstance that you could think of that would make you go running for heroin. Or if you're a non-smoker, that would make you pick up a cigarette, because you're not addicted to it, you're not dependent on it. But with regards to alcohol, over time, you can get to a place where no matter what happens to you, and this is the place where I feel I'm at now, and it has been a journey, and that's probably the most important thing, is to have somebody with you who kind of understands this process in terms of what is going on, to actually help you on this upward situation, because then no matter what happens with life, you do not get back under there. And that is the difference, that because if you've got somebody who just wants to hold you above this line, the minute things go bad, you're in real danger of relapsing and getting back into that situation again. And remember, this is not about not drinking. This is about being out of control with regards to your drinking. So when you're on that upward spiral, then you actually get back up to where a non-drinker is eventually, because these people up here, or people who drink very infrequently, they don't experience this cycle. They've not experienced the dependence, so they don't have that kind of coping mechanism built into them. So if you can get clear of this zone, and this is why I do say to people, it doesn't matter if you want to give up or if you want to cut down, and I would keep a really open mind on that as you go through this process. It actually doesn't matter. The key thing is that you take a break. You make this change here. You'll get yourself to a position of objectivity, and then if you want to have a drink again, then you can. I personally choose not to do that anymore, or I'll have the occasional sip of champagne if it's somebody's birthday or something like that. But the key thing is I don't need it anymore, and certainly I was in a situation where I really did need it, and I could not see a way that I could cope without it. But now you get to a situation where I cannot actually imagine that there would be any situation that would make me run for a bottle. And my life is stressful in so many different ways, but it's just I have different coping mechanisms now. I enjoy exercise, and I do all sorts of things like meditation and stuff like that, and they all actually do the same thing that I thought the alcohol did. It really didn't, but I thought it did, but without all the negative connotations, without the hangovers, without the stress at home, without the lack of performance at your job, and all those things. It's just a much more constructive coping mechanism. And that's the whole thing about the program. So if you think about it, the sort of the 7 modules, the core 7 modules, are very much focused around this part of the journey. So it's to make you strong, it's to completely change your view with regards to alcohol and what it's actually doing for you. And it may be that you've been there before in your life. You know, you've tried to give up and you've thought, no, I'm okay, but only to find that as you go on this amazing and beautiful and horrible journey called life, that you were doing really well and then bang, something's happened, you've fallen back below the line and you've gone back to the step. And you know, different people experience this in different ways, but the key thing is to keep moving forward. No matter what this does, if your overall graph is upward, then you will beat this in the long term. And that's why to just have this kind of day-to-time approach, being in recovery and things like that, it just never rang true to me, and I wanted to have better ambitions for you and for me in terms of what that looks like. Now, I also accept that some people are really happy. That feels like a good place to be. If they've been down here for quite a while, to get above the line is a triumph, and I applaud you for that. But it's just, what next? How do you do that? And this is where the 100-day email program is designed to make you strong again, to actually develop new patterns of behavior. So we've got you out of the situation of dependence with the core 7 days. So the 7 days, the 7 modules, gets you, changes the dynamic, but then the 100 days is what makes you really strong. And by the time you get to that end of that 100 days, you are in great shape, because if you follow my process in terms of learning, in terms of growing, you just don't ever want to go back to that place again. And that's why people report, they will say, actually, I just feel differently, because the program deals with your feelings. You cannot talk your way out of this. This is not a rational process. Anybody, if this was a rational process, you would never go down there anyway. You would just go, hang on a minute, it's bad for me, and that would be it. This is a subconscious process, and that's why this is fundamentally different, because it deals with your subconscious mind, not your rational mind, because that's where willpower. You cannot get out of this with willpower, I promise you, because at best you're going to get yourself just above the line a day at a time, and it's going to look like quite a hard battle for you for the rest of your life with regards to that. So I hope that makes sense to you. That is why the program is different. That's why it works completely differently to everything else that's out there. And just understand, just because you're not drinking doesn't make your life perfect. Bad stuff happens, but it's all about developing a better coping mechanism to deal with those things inevitably when they come. And actually, one of the things is that alcohol robs you of your ability to necessarily deal with some of these problems as they arise. It takes your energy away, it burns up a lot of your time, it takes your money away. Whereas you're in a much stronger position, so inevitably when things happen, you're in a really good place to deal with it. So thank you for your time. I hope that makes sense. You'll see that if what I've said makes sense and you think, okay, right, I get it, I just want to get going, there is a button below which will take you straight to, okay, well, what's involved. You don't have to wait for the webinar. And I'll just tell you, look, this is what it costs, this is what's involved, this is what I will give you, this is what you need to kind of do, and you can get going, because I know a lot of people will be watching this video because you are feeling a strong degree of urgency. So I don't want to waste your time in terms of making you wait for a webinar. By all means join me, but if you want to get going right now, just click on the button below or at the side, and we'll get cracking with that. So I hope that's made sense to you.